Welcome to Life Stories, where the quietest voices often carry the heaviest truths. What if the most heroic thing someone ever did was serve pancakes to a stranger every single morning without asking a single question? In a small town where no one notices much, a lonely waitress and a silent boy cross paths in a way that changes everything. But behind the routine lies a secret, a war, and a final letter that will make you question what kindness truly means. This isn't a story about grand gestures. It's about the quiet kind, the kind that asks for nothing and gives everything. And sometimes those are the acts that echo the loudest. So stay with us because the ending, it doesn't just break your heart, it rebuilds it. Let's begin. Claire Bennett woke before the sun, as she did every morning, to the creak of her radiator and the faint hum of early traffic below. Her apartment above the pharmacy smelled faintly of antiseptic and old newspapers, and the cold hardwood floor bit at her soles as she padded to the window. Outside, the town of Brookvale was still asleep. Streetlights blinking drowsily, mist clinging to the edge of rooftops like it wasn't ready to let go. Brookvale wasn't on most maps. A blip in the rural curves of Oregon, it held a single gas station, a hardware store that hadn't changed since 1983, and Bennett's Diner, named not for Claire but for her father, who had opened it in the 70s with hope and hash browns. He died when she was 15, her mother 2 years later. The diner, along with its linoleum counters and time-warp charm, had passed to Claire in every way except ownership. Officially, it was still run by Mark, the manager who used to be her father's friend, though used to did a lot of work in that sentence. She tied her apron around her waist like armor and walked 3 blocks to the diner, the same walk she'd made for nearly 11 years. The routine was a comfort until it wasn't. Lately, the silence of her life pressed closer. Moments between footsteps where the past crept in, asking questions she'd trained herself not to answer. At 6:45 a.m., Claire flipped the open sign and brewed the first pot of coffee. The diner came alive slowly. Harold with his crossword, the Clark twins ordering eggs Benedict and arguing about football, the hum of weather reports on the mounted TV. But Claire didn't need a clock to know it was 7:15. He entered the same way every day, quiet, eyes scanning the room like he was calculating threats instead of table numbers. Small for his age, maybe 9 or 10, with a backpack too big for his frame, and a hoodie he never took off. He always sat at the farthest booth from the door, facing both the window and the entrance. The booth no one wanted. The booth where people disappeared. He never ordered anything but water. He'd open a book, Claire noticed it was always the same one, and sip slowly like he had all the time in the world and none of the money. On the 5th day, she placed a plate of pancakes in front of him without a word. He stared at it like it might explode. "It was a mistake," she said softly. "The kitchen made extra." He didn't speak, just stared at her with an expression far too careful for someone his age. Hunger and distrust played tug-of-war behind his eyes. Claire gave him a gentle nod. Better to eat it than waste it. She walked away. 10 minutes later, the plate was empty. He never looked up. The next day, she did it again, and again the day after that. No names, no stories, just warm food and silence. Mark didn't ask questions until he did. "You feeding that kid from your own tips?" he asked one morning, arms crossed in the office doorway. Claire didn't look up from counting her register. "Yes." He let out a low whistle. "You know nothing about him." "I don't need to." Mark scoffed. "You're projecting." Claire paused. "Maybe, but I used to be that hungry too." It was the first personal thing she'd said in weeks, and it hung in the air like smoke. The boy never offered his name, and Claire never pushed. His eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was waiting for something, or someone. She didn't ask what. She only made sure the food was warm and that he never felt like a burden. Then he stopped coming. The first day, she pretended not to notice. The second, she told herself he might be sick. By the 7th day, she was watching the door like a lifeline. "Guess the free ride ended," Kathy the cook muttered. "They always leave." Claire didn't reply. She wrapped a plate of pancakes in foil and took it home. By day 10, people were talking. A customer snapped a photo of the empty booth and posted it online with the caption, "Guess the charity project's over? Hope she kept the receipts." It went viral, for the wrong reasons. Comments poured in, playing savior for likes, bet it's a scam. No wonder the diner's going downhill. Claire stopped reading after the third comment. But the ache didn't stop. That night, she opened a worn leather notebook, the one her father had carried during his deployment in Iraq. On a dog-eared page in fading ink he had written, "Gave half my meal to a boy today. Looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Johnson called me soft. Maybe, but I saw my own face in his. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf." Claire closed the book and let the silence settle around her. She returned to the diner the next morning. At 7:15, she placed a plate at the empty booth anyway. And that's when it happened. A black SUV pulled into the lot, then another, and another. 4 in total, each with government plates. A hush fell over the diner. Conversations paused. Coffee cups trembled slightly in their saucers. From the lead vehicle stepped a man in full military dress, rows of medals, a face lined not just with age but with the weight of command. He entered the diner, flanked by 2 officers. "Looking for Claire Bennett," he said, his voice low but commanding. Claire stood slowly. "I'm Claire." He approached with purpose and something else in his eyes, something close to reverence. "I'm Colonel Matthew Cole, United States Army Special Forces Command." He removed an envelope from his coat. "I've come on behalf of Master Sergeant Samuel James." The name meant nothing to Claire. His son, Logan, came here for weeks before school. He wrote about you in letters to his father while he was deployed. Claire's breath caught. "His mother abandoned him after the deployment," Cole continued. "He was living alone, hiding, surviving, and you were the only one who saw him." She felt the world tilt beneath her. "Sergeant James, he didn't make it home." The envelope shook in her hand. "In his last letter, he asked us to find you. He wrote, 'Tell her she didn't just feed my son. She preserved his dignity. She reminded him he wasn't alone.'" Every eye in the diner was on her now. And then Colonel Cole saluted. So did the officers behind him. So did the soldiers waiting outside. In the center of the diner stood a woman in a faded apron, gripping a father's last gratitude. And for the first time in a very long time, Claire Bennett didn't feel invisible. Have you ever offered kindness without knowing its impact? Do you believe even the smallest actions can echo through someone else's life? But the story doesn't end with a salute, because something else was waiting at Claire's doorstep the next morning, something that would change everything. Continue in the next part. Claire couldn't sleep that night. Even long after the black SUVs had disappeared down Main Street and the diner had returned to its quiet hum, something in her wouldn't settle. She'd placed the letter from Sergeant Samuel James on her nightstand, unopened, as if touching it too long might break something inside her she couldn't repair. She lay awake, the ceiling fan slicing the dark in slow rotations, the silence of her apartment louder than usual. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the window panes like fingers trying to get in. She finally rose just before dawn, dressed without turning on the lights, and walked to the diner through the chill. The sky was still bruised purple, the streets empty except for a few leaves tumbling across the pavement. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and flipped on the soft glow of the overhead fixtures. The warmth of the place wrapped around her like memory. On the counter, just beneath the pie display, was a padded manila envelope she hadn't seen the night before. No return address. Just her name, written in precise block letters. She opened it slowly. Inside, a letter on notebook paper, the kind with wide blue lines and a faint smell of pencil graphite. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Dear Miss Claire, I didn't know your name until Colonel Cole said it. But every morning for those weeks, you looked at me like I wasn't broken. Like I was just a kid reading a book. You never asked why I didn't have a mom or where my dad was. You just brought pancakes. And it helped. Grandma says I should write thank you notes. Grandpa says real heroes don't ask for attention. I think maybe you're both." I miss Dad, and sometimes I miss the booth at your diner. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't give answers. Your friend, Logan. Claire stared at the letter for a long time, her throat tight. She read it again, then a third time, memorizing the weight of each word. When the sun rose, she pinned the letter to the corkboard behind the counter, just above the register, just below a faded photo of her father in uniform. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. 2 weeks later, the diner was busier than usual. A group of active-duty soldiers passing through town had taken the corner booths. Local news had run a story on Claire's quiet act of kindness, and people came from nearby towns just to meet her. At first, Claire smiled through it, grateful, humble, but she began to notice something strange. A man came in 3 days in a row, always wearing sunglasses, always ordering nothing. Just sat there, phone in hand, sometimes snapping photos when he thought she wasn't looking. Another woman sat at the counter pretending to read a menu, her eyes always darting toward Claire, lips moving as if rehearsing something. Then, one afternoon, a couple in suits walked in. They didn't eat. They introduced themselves as documentary producers. They wanted to tell Claire's story. "We're pitching it to a streaming platform," the woman said, excitement in her voice. "You're exactly what America needs right now. A good Samaritan, a quiet hero." Claire forced a smile. "I'm not a hero. I just made pancakes." The woman laughed like she didn't believe her. "But it's more than that. You represent something. Hope, empathy, resilience." "I didn't do it to represent anything," Claire said quietly. That night, Mark handed her a contract. "They reached out to me," he said, shrugging. "You'd be paid a percentage of the story rights. It could put this place on the map." Claire stared at the document. Her name was there, printed neatly next to the word subject. The diner. Logan. Even Sergeant James. "You want me to turn a boy's grief into a series pitch?" "It's not like that, Claire," Mark said, softening. "It's honoring what you did." But Claire didn't feel honored. She felt exposed. For the first time in her life, she'd done something that mattered. And now people wanted to wrap it in lights and cameras and streaming deals. That night, she walked the long way home, past Logan's old elementary school, past the church with the worn-out sign that always said something like, "God loves a cheerful giver." And she felt angry. For Logan, for his father, for herself. What had started as a quiet act of kindness was turning into someone else's narrative, and she didn't know how to stop it. The next morning, she was surprised to see Kathy waiting outside the diner. The older woman held 2 cups of coffee, offering one without a word. Claire took it. "You ever feel like you lost control of your own story?" Kathy lit a cigarette and looked out at the misty street. "I lost mine years ago. Gave it away, really." "To who?" "To the idea that kindness needed an audience." They stood in silence for a while, and then Kathy said something Claire never expected. "I knew who Logan was. I recognized him. He's not just some stray. His mother, she used to live in this town, years ago. Trouble followed her like a shadow. When she left, no one was surprised. But the boy was different." Claire looked at her, stunned. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't think he'd stay, and I didn't think you'd care that much." "I didn't need to know," Claire said. "I just needed to help." "Well," Kathy exhaled, smoke trailing. "That's why it mattered." Inside the diner, the bell chimed. It was a young woman, early 30s, eyes puffy, face drawn with exhaustion. She held the hand of a little girl no older than 5. "We heard about this place," she said hesitantly. "They said, no one leaves hungry." Claire nodded and guided them to Logan's old booth. She brought out pancakes. No questions, no cameras, just food. When is kindness about healing others, and when is it about healing ourselves? But what Claire didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone was watching from across the street, holding a different kind of envelope, one that would open a chapter even she wasn't ready for. Continue in the next part of the story. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Claire almost missed it, wedged between an electricity bill and a takeout menu in her mailbox. The envelope was thicker than most, stiff and heavy, sealed with a wax stamp she didn't recognize. Her name was handwritten in black ink, delicate but purposeful. No return address, no logo, just her name. She hesitated before opening it, heart fluttering with an old familiar feeling, like something from another life had finally caught up to her. Inside was a single page and a photograph. The letter was written in careful cursive. Miss Claire, you don't know me, but I know what you did for my grandson. Logan still talks about you, about your pancakes, about how you looked at him like he mattered. We didn't know how alone he had been until it was almost too late. I also know that what you did cost you more than people realize. I was Samuel James's mother. You see, before Sam left for deployment, he wrote a series of letters, to Logan, to us, to the Army. But there was one letter he didn't mail. He gave it to a friend, told him if I don't make it back, find the woman at the diner. That friend kept his promise. It just took a little time. This letter is for you. I'm only the messenger. What's inside changed my life. I imagine it will change yours too. Beneath the note was a second envelope, smaller, faded. The paper looked like it had been folded and refolded 100 times. Claire stared at it for a long time before sliding her fingers beneath the flap. Claire, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. But that's not the part I want you to hold on to. Logan told me about you, said you never asked questions, never made him explain the weight he carried. You just gave him pancakes and let him breathe. That might not sound like much to most people. But it meant everything to him. And to me. He'd write about you in his letters, said you wore your hair tied back and always had ink smudges on your order pad, said you smiled with your eyes more than your mouth, said you reminded him of someone brave. That was his word, brave. What you gave my son wasn't food, it was dignity, it was safety, it was a thread back to humanity. You gave that to him without knowing who he was or what he'd lost. That kind of kindness doesn't come from obligation. It comes from pain, which means you've probably known your share of it. I wish I could have thanked you in person. I wish a lot of things. But mostly, I wish the world had more people like you in it. I hope one day, when Logan is older and the ache has dulled, he'll sit in a diner and see someone who needs what you gave him, and he'll pass it on. You saved a part of my son I couldn't protect from over there. Thank you, Claire. With everything I have, Sam. Claire sat on the steps of her building, letter trembling in her hands, the wind tugging gently at its corners. The photograph that came with the letter had slipped onto her lap. It was a candid shot. Logan, about 5 years old, laughing in a backyard sprinkler. Behind him, a man in uniform crouched low, arms outstretched mid-laugh, mid-reach. Samuel James, alive in that photo, real. Smiling, human, and somehow, through time and loss and silence, he had still reached her. That night, the diner was unusually quiet. Claire didn't speak of the letter. Didn't need to. The town had shifted since the SUVs arrived. People were softer with one another, more generous with their words. The booth where Logan used to sit had become a quiet sort of shrine. Not flashy, just respected. Mark stopped her as she was wiping down tables. "You okay?" he asked. Claire looked up. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about time." "Anything I can do?" she considered. "You still got that sign?" He frowned. "Which one?" "The one you put in the window, about no one leaving hungry." Mark gave a small grin. "Of course. Why?" Claire took a deep breath. "Let's make it permanent." The next week, a new plaque was installed outside the diner door. It read, "No one leaves hungry. Not now. Not ever." Underneath it, in small print, a quote, "No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf." Sam James in a campaign. It wasn't for a show. It was the truth. People came and went. Soldiers passed through town and left behind badges, coins, patches. One woman left a pair of dog tags folded in a napkin with a note, "He would have loved your coffee." And then, one Sunday afternoon, Logan came back. He was taller, older. His eyes were still watchful, but not as guarded. His grandparents stood behind him, letting him lead the way. Claire didn't say anything when he entered. Just smiled. He took his old seat, now polished and worn, and looked up at her. "You still make pancakes?" he asked, voice cracking just a little. Claire nodded, throat tight. Always. She brought him a plate. No questions. Just food. He ate slowly this time, like he wasn't afraid it would be taken from him. When he finished, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a book, the same one he used to read. The corners were dog-eared, the spine worn, the cover taped. "I brought this," he said, sliding it across the table. "Thought you should have it." Claire opened it. On the inside cover, in careful block letters, he had written, "For Miss Claire, who taught me how to finish the story." Claire ran her fingers over the words, and for the first time in a very long time, she let the tears fall, not for what was lost, but for what had been saved, and what had been passed on. Because sometimes the most powerful things we give aren't the things we buy or build or say. Sometimes they're the things we offer in silence, without expecting anything back. A warm plate, a quiet space, a moment of dignity. And sometimes when the world gets loud again, we remember that someone once saw us and didn't look away. How did this story make you feel? Did a specific moment stay with you the most? Comment 100 if you felt this story deeply. Tell us what country you're watching from. Share this story with someone who believes kindness still matters. Thank you for watching Life Stories.